The reading is taken from John chapter 9, verses 1 to 41. And it's entitled, Jesus Heals a Man Born Blind. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been born blind. His disciples asked him, "Teacher, whose sin caused him to be born blind? Was it his own, or was it his parents' sin?" Jesus answered, "His blindness has nothing to do with his sins or his parents' sins. He is blind so that God's power might be seen at work in him. As long as it is day, we must keep on doing the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I'm in the world, I am the light for the world." After he said this, Jesus spat on the ground and made some mud with the spittle. He rubbed the mud on the man's eyes and said, "Go and wash your face in the pool of Siloam." This name means sent. So the man went, washed his face, and came back seeing. His neighbours then, and the people who had seen him begging before this, asked, "Isn't this the man who used to sit and beg?" Some said, "He is the one," but others said, "No, he isn't. He just looks like him." So the man himself said, "I am the man." "How is it that you can see?" they asked him. He answered, "The man called Jesus made some mud, rubbed it on my eyes, and told me to go to Siloam and wash my face. So I went. And as soon as I washed, I could see." "Where is he?" they asked. "I don't know," he answered. They took to the Pharisees the man who had been born blind. The day that Jesus made the mud and cured him of his blindness was a Sabbath. The Pharisees then asked the man again how he had received his sight. He told them, "He put some mud on my eyes, I washed my face, and now I can see." Some of the Pharisees said, "The man who did this cannot be from God, for he does not obey the law of the Sabbath." Others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such miracles as these?" And there was a division amongst them. So the Pharisees asked the man once more, "You say he cured you of your blindness. Well, what do you say about him?" "He is a prophet," the man answered. The Jewish authorities, however, were not willing to believe that he had been blind and could now see until they called his parents and asked them, "Is this your son? You say that he was born blind. How is it then that he can now see?" His parents answered, "We know that he is our son, and we know that he was born blind. But we do not know how it is he is able to see, nor do we know who cured him of his blindness. Ask him. He's old enough. He can answer for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish authorities, who had already agreed that anyone who said he believed that Jesus was the Messiah would be expelled from the synagogue. That is why his parents said, "He is old enough, ask him." A second time they called back the man who had been born blind and said to him, "Promise before God that you will tell the truth. We know that this man who cured you is a sinner." "I do not know if he's a sinner or not," the man replied. "One thing I do know, I was blind, and now I can see." "What did he do to you?" they asked. "How did he cure you of your blindness?" "I have already told you," he answered, "and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Maybe you too would like to be his disciples." They cursed him and said, "You are that fellow's disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses, as for that fellow, however, we do not even know where he comes from." The man answered, "What a strange thing that is. You do not know where he comes from, but he cured me of my blindness. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He does listen to people who respect him and do what he wants them to do. Since the beginning of the world, nobody has ever heard of anyone giving sight to a person born blind. Unless this man came from God, he would not be able to do such a thing." They answered, "You were born and brought up in sin, and you are trying to teach us?" And they expelled him from the synagogue. When Jesus heard what had happened, he found the man and asked him, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" The man answered, "Tell me who he is, sir, so that I can believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have already seen him, and he is the one who is talking with you now." "I believe, Lord," the man said, and knelt down before Jesus. Jesus said, "I came to the world to judge, so that the blind should see, and those who see should become blind." Some Pharisees who were there with him heard him say this and asked him, "Surely you don't mean we're blind too?" Jesus answered, "If you were blind, then you would not be guilty. But since you claim that you can see, this means that you are still guilty." Thanks be to God.
So may the words of my mouth and the thoughts of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Sometimes it's useful to give one's sermon a title, and so this sermon has a title, and it is Mother Church. One version of the fourth Sunday of Lent is that soldiers were allowed home on that day to attend their mother church, their home church. As you know, we are attempting in this church here to set up some new ways of doing things. And so I want us to think for a couple of minutes about serving our mother church, and we will come back during the course of the sermon to that reading that we just had. So, our mother church, Tilehurst Methodist Church, we are the people of God in this place, and we exist to build and grow the church. Look around you. Who do you see? What do you see amongst your family and friends? I see here, when I look out at this congregation, a mixture of talents, skills, hopes, dreams, prayers, experience, abilities, all kinds of things. And some of these things will have been given to us by God, especially in order to grow the church. And when we start to put all those things together, amazing things can happen. Miracles can happen. Because we're not on our own. God is here too. And we see this already in various aspects of our life here. We see God at work. We see the miracle of God's people. Now, if you cast your mind back to last week, you may remember that we had the story of where Moses struck the rock with his stick and brought forth water for the thirsty people to drink. We talked a lot about rocks, and your knowledge of rocks was mightily impressive. And we mentioned the fact that some rocks have water cavities in them, so you could strike them and the water could come out. And I asked you whether, knowing that, did you still believe it was a miracle story? And there was a resounding yes from this congregation. So if you're the kind of people who can see God's miracles in everyday things, then I think you're the kind of people who can see God's miracles already at work here in this congregation and community. Like Moses in that story and many others in the history since then, we can partner with God and amazing things happen. Another thing about serving, of course, is that it helps our own faith to grow. We learn and we discover, and that's really exciting. We move out of our comfort zones. We try new things, and we start to see new potential in ourselves and one another. And that is the power of God in us and it is life-giving and joyful. So, do you have any idea what you are called to be or what you are called to do within the life of this church as it changes and develops? All of us are called to belong. First and foremost, we belong together as the church of God in this place, in our mother church. But beyond that, we each have a role. The Bible is a collection of many different types of writings. I'm sure you know this already. There's theology, there's history, there's poetry, there's all kinds of imaginative stuff, there's the life of Jesus, there's letters to the early church. One of the unifying themes of all of that is that people hear the voice of God and they are changed. And we heard that, I think, in that reading today. That reading of the man born blind and his life changed. Now, in that reading, there are at least 2 miracles. And I say at least because you've all read or heard the story, and different people see things in different ways. But there are at least 2 miracles that leap out to me. And those miracles are to do with physical healing and spiritual awakening. For the blind man in the story, the encounter with Jesus must have been something of a surprise, to say the least. It was completely life-changing, wasn't it? Mind-blowing. And we may wonder what he did next. What else in his life was impacted by his encounter with Jesus? Everything, you would imagine. Just imagine the jobs he could get that he couldn't get before. The people, the relationships that he could build that he couldn't do in the same way before. How frustrating, isn't it, that we don't know what happened to him next. But then again, we don't know everything about our own story either, because we are not yet complete. God has far more to do with us than has been done up to now. That story of the blind man is a story about endless possibility. Anything can happen with God. Even the blind can see. John's version of the story uses the event to make a spiritual point too. All the things we know, all the things we've seen, all the things we think we've seen, there's more. There's a lot more, because God is there in the story. Now, you may or may not have noticed this, because I know things have sort of been strange as we've come back out of COVID and that. But when we're finished with communion, I never put the cloth back over the elements. If you look in the book, it says that the minister is supposed to cover the elements with a cloth. Well, I don't do that. I just leave it all sitting there, because for me, that's a symbol that with God, there's always more. It's not finished. There's more every day. Now, of course, some people can't see anything. There are those in the crowd who'd known that man born blind all his life, and they couldn't see what a good thing it was that he'd been healed. Even his own parents, what was wrong with them, for goodness sake? Even for them, this wasn't a good news story. They were just scared. Good news isn't always well received, is it? But what is our next piece of good news? What could be the next piece of good news about this church here? We don't know. We trust God. We wait. And then we will see. Do you want to be part of that? Do you want to be part of this imagining, this new stuff? Do you want to see God at work within us? I started off calling this sermon Mother Church. Is that something you can identify with? I've only called it that because it's Mother's Day. You can call it something else if you want. anything that grabs your imagination, that helps you to feel that you belong and that you have something to be and to do here.